In the silence of the early morning, Evelyn stirred from a deep, dreamless sleep. The cold morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting faint shadows across the room. She yawned, stretching out her arms before swinging them to her side, feeling the plush warmth of the bed beneath her. It was still too early for her to rise, but her body had woken before the sun. With a sleepy groan, she rolled over and sat up, blinking against the haze of sleep. The house was quiet. Too quiet, she thought, as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. She let her feet touch the cool wooden floor, and she stood, making her way toward the bathroom. Her house was quiet, as it usually was at this hour, but the stillness seemed off. As she passed by the hallway mirror, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. She stopped in her tracks. The woman staring back at her wasn't Evelyn. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she froze. The woman in the mirror had familiar features. Brown eyes, auburn hair, a fair complexion. But something was wrong. Her face seemed different. The skin appeared unnaturally smooth, almost like porcelain, the edges of her features sharper than she remembered. Her eyes looked cold, distant. She blinked hard, confused, trying to shake off the sensation of her own reflection being foreign. She stepped closer to the mirror, her breathing quickening, and reached a trembling hand toward her face. Her fingers traced the contours of her cheek, the bridge of her nose, the shape of her lips. They felt like her own, but they didn't look like them. The more she stared, the more the face in the mirror seemed alien, as if it was someone else entirely. It was a haunting feeling, and Evelyn could not tear her gaze away from the reflection. She had never experienced anything like this before. She glanced back at her room, looking for something, anything that would make sense of what she was seeing. The clock on her bedside table read 6:12 a.m. The house was still in its sleepy silence. There were no voices, no sounds of movement. No one else was awake. She swallowed hard, her breath shaky, and turned back to face the mirror again, trying to steady her thoughts. "Get a grip, Evelyn," she muttered to herself. "It's just an odd angle, the light playing tricks on you." She turned her head slightly, then slowly faced forward again, hoping the reflection would change, would settle into something more familiar. But it didn't. The woman in the mirror remained, still, cold, unblinking. Evelyn's heart began to race again as a cold dread crawled up her spine. There had to be something wrong, something that wasn't right. She knew she wasn't imagining things. The more she looked, the more she couldn't recognize herself. Something had shifted. Something had changed. But what? She reached for the towel rack beside her, gripping it tightly to steady herself. The reflection, however, did not waver. It simply stared back, emotionless. Her hands began to shake, the icy feeling in her chest spreading. The panic rose, threatening to consume her. With trembling fingers, she grabbed her phone from the counter and opened the camera app. The screen lit up, showing her own face. It was her, wasn't it? But the phone didn't lie. It wasn't her. Her breath hitched. Her face suddenly flushed as the stark reality sank in. The reflection in the mirror seemed to warp, as though the phone screen had revealed the truth. The woman who had once been her was gone, replaced by a stranger. Evelyn's mouth went dry as she stared at her phone, then turned back to the mirror. The woman's face remained unchanged. Her fingers clenched and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to calm down. She had to. Maybe she was just overtired, she reasoned. Maybe the lighting in the room was making her look different. Maybe it was something as simple as that. But deep down, Evelyn knew it wasn't that. She wasn't sure what it was, but something had shifted. Something had changed. And it wasn't just her mind playing tricks. "Mom?" A voice called from downstairs, interrupting her thoughts. Evelyn's gaze snapped toward the door, the sound of her daughter's voice breaking the tension in the room. She could hear the soft patter of footsteps on the stairs, followed by the appearance of her daughter, Lily, standing in the doorway. Lily, 12 years old, her messy brown hair tied up in a ponytail, blinked at her mother. "Are you okay, Mom? You look different." Evelyn opened her mouth to say something, but her throat went dry. "I'm fine," she managed after a long pause, forcing herself to smile. Lily frowned, her gaze lingering on Evelyn. You look strange," she said hesitantly. She stepped forward, peering closely at her mother. "Are you sick?" Evelyn hesitated. "No," she whispered, almost as though saying the word out loud would make it true. But it didn't feel true. Nothing felt right. Lily's face was so familiar, and yet the room around her seemed unfamiliar. Her own reflection, her own face, it all felt foreign. Lily cocked her head, her brows furrowed. "Maybe you should lie down," she suggested gently, her voice tinged with concern. Evelyn nodded, taking one more glance at the mirror before slowly backing away. She needed to breathe. She needed to think. But the thoughts wouldn't stop tumbling in her mind. What had happened to her face? Why did she feel like a stranger in her own skin? She made her way back to her room, her legs feeling heavy as she moved. The floor creaked beneath her, and her heart raced as she tried to shake off the growing unease. But with each step, the dread inside her only grew. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't make sense of it. She only knew that she had to get away from the mirror, away from the strange woman staring back at her. As she stepped into her room and sat down on the bed, she let her head fall into her hands, trying to steady her breathing. She felt her pulse thrumming in her ears, the sensation of being trapped in a nightmare settling over her. She closed her eyes, wishing it all away. But it didn't go away. It stayed. Her mind raced, her thoughts spinning in circles. The image of the woman in the mirror wouldn't leave her mind, no matter how much she tried to push it away. She tried to concentrate, to think clearly. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was a trick of the light or some odd combination of factors. She glanced at her hands, the skin still familiar beneath her fingers, and yet she couldn't shake the sense of wrongness. It wasn't just her face. It was everything. "Mom," Lily's voice called again, pulling Evelyn from her spiraling thoughts. She slowly rose from the bed, forcing herself to move. "Yes," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady, but the tremor in it was undeniable. "You need to see this," Lily said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Evelyn made her way downstairs to find her daughter standing in the living room, holding an old photograph in her hands. Lily held it out to her with a worried look on her face. Evelyn took the photograph, her fingers trembling as she stared down at it. It was a picture of her family, taken years ago at a beach on a summer vacation. She was standing beside her husband, Mark, smiling as the sun set behind them. But there was something wrong with the photo. It wasn't just the quality of the image. It wasn't the lighting or the fading of time. Evelyn's own face in the photo was wrong. The woman in the picture was not her. Her features were different. The eyes colder, the smile too wide, too sharp. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the face in the photograph. This wasn't her. It couldn't be. Lily looked at her mother, fear in her eyes. "Mom, who is that woman in the picture?" Evelyn could only stare back at the photograph, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her daughter's voice. The woman in the picture wasn't her, and it wasn't anyone she knew. It was someone else entirely. But who? Evelyn's knees buckled, and she sank down to the floor as everything around her seemed to blur. The familiar faces, the warm home, her family. They were all slipping away from her. And in their place, the cold alien woman in the mirror and the photograph remained. The terrifying realization settled in like a dark, suffocating fog. The woman in the mirror, the stranger in the photograph. Who was she? And why did it feel like Evelyn had never been the one staring back at her all along? Evelyn sat in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to steady her breathing. Lily was sitting across from her, glancing back and forth between her mother and the old photograph. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken fear. Evelyn could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the cold sweat beginning to form on her skin. She still couldn't understand it, couldn't make sense of the image in the photo. The woman wasn't her. The woman in the picture had different eyes, a different expression, a different face entirely. It was as if someone had taken a memory of her life and altered it in the most disturbing way. Evelyn wasn't sure whether she should feel anger, fear, or confusion. The sense of loss was overwhelming. The photograph slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the floor. She could hear Lily's shaky breath as her daughter leaned closer, inspecting the image in silence. "Mom," Lily finally whispered, breaking the stillness. "That woman, that's not you, is it?" Evelyn shook her head, though she wasn't sure why she bothered. She could hear her own voice, but the words didn't feel like they belonged to her. "No," she said hoarsely, "it's not me, but it looks like me. Why does it look like me?" Lily remained silent, her eyes wide, but Evelyn could tell that the young girl was trying to understand, trying to make sense of the situation, the same way her mother was. Evelyn's gaze fell to her own hands. They felt so ordinary, so familiar. But the longer she stared at them, the more disconnected she felt. Her hands didn't seem like her own. They didn't belong to the person she thought she was. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She froze, her eyes flicking toward the sound. Mark had always been the early riser, and she had expected him to return from his morning jog at some point. But this wasn't his knock. This was different. Lily stood up slowly, walking to the door as Evelyn remained frozen, her heart beating faster. She didn't want to open it. She couldn't explain why, but the thought of someone entering the house, the idea of a stranger on the other side, filled her with an inexplicable dread. Lily opened the door with a cautious hand, revealing a tall man in his late 40s standing just outside. He wore a dark coat, his eyes obscured by the shadows of the morning light. Can I help you? Lily asked, her voice tentative. The man smiled, if you could even call it a smile. It was more like a grimace, something that stretched unnaturally across his face. Evelyn could feel her skin prickle as she watched him, her mind screaming at her to do something, anything, but her body remained frozen in place. I'm sorry to disturb you, the man said, his voice deep and unsettling. I need to speak with Evelyn. He turned his gaze toward her, though she hadn't moved. His eyes were too cold. Is she here? Evelyn felt a chill run through her body as the man's eyes locked onto hers. She couldn't remember ever having seen him before, yet he seemed to know her. His presence made her want to run, to escape. But where would she go? Who could she trust? I'm here, she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. The man's smile grew wider, though it was devoid of warmth. Good. I've been looking for you. Lily looked back at Evelyn, confused and worried. Who are you? She asked, stepping back slightly. Why are you here? The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, looking at Evelyn with a strange intensity that made her skin crawl. Evelyn wanted to say something, anything, but she couldn't find the words. The man took a step forward, and Evelyn instinctively recoiled. But then he stopped, his eyes never leaving hers. It's time you understood what's happened to you, Evelyn, he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. You've forgotten, but you're not who you think you were. Evelyn blinked, her mind spinning. Forgotten? What did he mean? She shook her head, as if to clear the confusion. What are you talking about? Her voice was a bit stronger now, though the fear still gripped her chest. You were never supposed to look like this. The man continued, taking another step closer, his voice steady but dark. But something's gone wrong. Something very wrong. A shiver ran through Evelyn's spine. Who are you? She repeated, more forcefully this time, her mind racing. She needed answers. She needed to know what was happening to her. The man's eyes darkened, and for a moment Evelyn thought she saw a flicker of something dangerous in them. My name is Thomas, he said quietly, and I've been sent to help you remember. Remember what? Evelyn wanted to ask, but the words caught in her throat. Her chest tightened with panic as the room seemed to grow smaller. This wasn't just about her face. It wasn't just about the reflection she had seen in the mirror.
Something deeper was happening, something that went far beyond her appearance. Lily stepped between them, her small body blocking the door. She looked at the man warily. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Who is this guy?" Evelyn wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything was okay, but the words wouldn't come. She could barely breathe, let alone explain the terrifying truth that was starting to form in her mind. The man, Thomas, glanced at Lily, then back at Evelyn. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice hardening. "You need to come with me." Evelyn stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean? Why should I trust you?" Thomas's gaze softened for a moment, but it was a fleeting change. "You don't have a choice. There's no time left." Without thinking, Evelyn stepped back, her mind whirling with disbelief. She didn't know what to do. This man, whoever he was speaking in riddles, but everything inside her screamed that he knew something. He knew what had happened to her. He knew what was wrong.
Lily looked up at her, fear and confusion in her eyes. "Mom, please, who is he?" Evelyn couldn't answer. She could barely breathe. Everything felt wrong. The house, her family, her own face. It all seemed like a dream, slipping away from her grasp. The man's words echoed in her mind. "You're not who you think you are. You've forgotten." Suddenly, Evelyn's eyes fell to the photograph still on the floor, the image of the strange woman staring back at her. It wasn't her face. It couldn't be. But if it wasn't her, then who was it? I don't understand," Evelyn whispered, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. She wanted to run, to escape from this nightmare, but there was nowhere to go. Nothing made sense anymore. Thomas stepped forward again, his movement slow but deliberate. "You're not from here, Evelyn," he said, his voice softening, though it was laced with urgency. "You were never supposed to be. The people you call family, they're not your real family. And the life you've been living, it's not yours." Evelyn's head spun, and her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the floor, unable to hold herself upright any longer. The weight of his words crushed her. Her mind was screaming, but she couldn't make sense of anything. Everything she thought she knew, the life she had lived, the people she loved, was a lie. And the face staring back at her in the mirror was a mask, a disguise, a foreign thing that didn't belong. "Who am I?" Evelyn finally managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas knelt beside her, his expression grim. "That's the question, isn't it?" he said quietly. You were never meant to remember, but now you must. Evelyn closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. Her whole life was unraveling, and she didn't know how to stop it. Evelyn's mind was spinning in a chaotic whirl of emotions, the truth dawning on her like a heavy weight she couldn't escape. The words Thomas had spoken echoed through her thoughts, each one more disorienting than the last. You're not who you think you are. Your family isn't yours. The life you've been living is a lie. Her chest tightened, suffocating her as she stared at him. The man, Thomas, seemed so certain of everything. But how could he be? How could he know things she didn't even understand herself? How could he know the truth about her? Lily's small voice broke through the haze of confusion. Mom, please, what's going on? Her voice quivered, the fear in her words palpable. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry, her mind struggling to catch up. She turned to Lily, seeing her daughter's face twisted in concern, the edges of her innocence beginning to fray in the face of these impossible truths. I don't know, Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what's happening, but I don't know if I can trust him. Thomas watched them both, his eyes soft but laden with an unspoken urgency. You have to understand, Evelyn. There are forces at play here, forces that you cannot begin to comprehend. But if you don't come with me now, everything will be lost. You'll never get back what was taken from you. Evelyn's pulse quickened at his words. What had been taken from her? Her whole life, her memories, her very sense of self. Had they all been stolen from her? Was this her real life? Or was she living in someone else's? Lily grabbed her hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Mom, she said quietly, I don't understand, but please, don't go with him. I need you. We need you. Evelyn's heart broke at the sound of her daughter's voice. The love she felt for Lily surged within her like a tidal wave, pushing back against the cold uncertainty that Thomas had planted in her heart. She had to protect her. She couldn't leave her daughter in this strange, fragmented world where nothing made sense. But as she stood there, staring at Lily and then at Thomas, a deep, aching sense of doubt clawed at her. What was she supposed to do? What was the right choice? She didn't have the answers. She didn't even know if she was the same person she had been before. Her entire reality had been shattered. Who was she now? Thomas, sensing her hesitation, took another step forward, his expression hardening. "You're running out of time," he said, his voice low, almost threatening. "You have no choice. You'll remember soon enough. You have to come with me." Evelyn took a deep breath, her mind racing as she searched for clarity in the chaos of her thoughts. There was something in her gut telling her that Thomas wasn't lying, that he knew things about her that she didn't even know herself. But at the same time, something about him, something about his cold urgency, felt off. Could she trust him? Or was he another piece of the puzzle, another fragment of this broken life she couldn't make sense of? As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, she made her decision. "No," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'm not going with you." Thomas's eyes darkened, his face hardening into something cold, almost predatory. "You're making a mistake," he warned, his voice tightening. "You can't outrun what's coming." Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped back, pulling Lily closer to her. "We'll find another way," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "We'll figure this out." The man's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, but then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the door, his long strides quickly carrying him into the shadows of the morning. Evelyn didn't watch him leave. She didn't want to see him anymore. She didn't want to hear his words echoing in her head. She wanted to believe that she still had a chance to reclaim what was hers. But as the door clicked shut behind him, something deep inside Evelyn stirred. The weight of his warning remained with her, and the nagging feeling that he had spoken the truth refused to let go. The world around her seemed unchanged, but the fabric of reality felt fragile now. The mirror no longer reflected just her face. It reflected the questions that had begun to haunt her. Questions she didn't have answers to. "What do we do now, Mom?" Lily's voice broke her from her thoughts. The child was still holding her hand, still looking to her for answers, for reassurance. But Evelyn had none to give. She had no answers. But she wasn't going to give up. Not yet. "We start over," Evelyn said, her voice softer now, but with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "We find out what happened to me. To us." She looked at Lily, the one person she knew she could trust, the only one whose love was certain, whose face was familiar in the storm of confusion. Together, they would figure this out. Together, they would find the truth. No matter how twisted or terrifying it might be. But as the days passed, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Not Thomas, not the man in the doorway, but something darker, something more insidious. It was in the way the air seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. It was in the way her reflection in the mirror seemed to warp and twist when she stood too close. It was in the way she sometimes caught glimpses of shadows just beyond her sight, moving with a deliberate, predatory pace. The house no longer felt like her home. Each creak of the floorboards, each gust of wind outside felt like an omen. Evelyn would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as she struggled to breathe. And in those moments, she would look around the dark room, half expecting to see that man standing there, watching her with his cold, empty eye. But no one was there. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, trying to piece together the remnants of her fractured memories, Lily came to her with an old journal in her hands. She had found it tucked away in the back of a drawer, buried under layers of dust. Evelyn didn't recognize the book at first. It was worn, its edges frayed with age, and the cover was marked with something she couldn't quite make out. But the moment she opened it, a chill ran down her spine. The first page was filled with her own handwriting, but something about it felt wrong. The words were familiar, but the way they were written, the way they curved and swirled, was different from the way she had always written. The more she read, the more she felt the eerie sensation that she wasn't reading about herself, but someone else, someone who had lived her life before, and whose memories now bled into hers. The journal spoke of strange dreams, of faces that didn't belong, and of a life that wasn't quite right. It was filled with cryptic phrases, images of places she didn't remember visiting, and references to things she couldn't recall ever experiencing. As Evelyn read on, she came across one passage that stopped her cold. The mirror shows a face, but it's not mine. The face looks like me, but it isn't. I don't know who I am anymore, but I know I've been here before, and I know I've left. Her breath caught in her throat. This was her handwriting, her words, but they weren't her memories. They couldn't be. And then it hit her. The truth. The answer she had been searching for began to take shape in her mind. The truth was worse than she could have imagined. It wasn't just that someone had stolen her life. It was that she had never belonged here in the first place. This wasn't her world.
This wasn't her family. She wasn't Evelyn. And as the realization sank in, the reflection in the mirror once again shifted. It was no longer the woman she thought she had been. It was someone else's face.